Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a Marvel's Avengers video, and today we have a hero breakdown on every single one of the playable characters at launch. This information is coming from an IGN interview with Vince Napoli, who is the lead combat designer on Marvel's Avengers, and if you had a little bit of doubt on how the combat looked, then this will at least ease your mind a bit, because he was on Sony's God of War team. So while the graphics of Marvel's Avengers might not quite be like God of War, the gameplay and the weight of the combat, especially with Thor, because the similarities with Thor and Kratos are completely obvious, especially with the latest God of War, which Vince Napoli worked on, having Kratos, rather than starting off with his blades, instead starting off with a Leviathan axe, which you could recall, and everyone saw that and immediately thought of Thor's hammer. So he has perfect inspiration for making the Thor combat great, but he's also talked about all of the other heroes and characters that we will be able to play as. We're going to start with the man who is supposedly dead in Marvel's Avengers, and that is Captain America. If you really believe that he actually dies on the helicarrier, and they have created a whole combat system with gear and new skins for Cap, for him to only die in the first mission after about 3 minutes of combat, I don't know how to break this to you, but he will be alive. And while it is most likely that he just, because he's a super soldier, actually just survived the helicarrier crash and has been hiding out as a civilian, maybe he'll have a beard, maybe they'll go for inspiration from Infinity War and have him look like a proper civilian and a bit overgrown, it is very unlikely that they use any other device to explain him coming back, because the two that I can immediately think of is, number one, time travel, which if they introduce that in the first Avengers game after waiting until Endgame to bring that into the MCU, they're absolutely insane, and it could really mess up their storytelling if you can just reverse time however you feel like it if they do continue with a gaming universe. And the other one is a second dimension, which absolutely could be a thing in the future of this game, but again, to add multiple dimensions immediately into the game before you even finish the first game to explain Captain America coming back would be completely insane, and is definitely just not the way they're going to go. I think they'll just explain it away as, how did you survive, Cap? And then he just took ages to recover. Maybe we even get a flashback to him actually on the helicarrier when it goes down, which I really hope we do, so it explains how he survived rather than just, oh look, Captain America's back now you can play as him. But you will be able to play as him more than just on the helicarrier, because they have put a lot of detail and work into his combat system, especially on how they make use of Cap's shield. Vince Napoli himself said that throwing the shield is obviously so iconic and needed to feel so special, and that his shield throw actually has its own built-in ranged combo. It's a unique characteristic that the other characters don't have, which I'm glad to hear that. I don't want everyone to have the same power sets and the same abilities to use. Everyone being so different is what makes bringing these characters together such a great thing. And quite interestingly here, there's clearly some skill to learning playing Cap at his absolute best, because if you use perfect timing as you catch and throw it, it will increment his throws and create different throws and reactions on the enemies. And he also has a special counter kickback, which we saw in the A-Day gameplay, which is after you use his charged throw, which will then attack multiple enemies at the same time, after it hits that last enemy, if you time the kickback after it hits the last enemy, he'll jump up, kick the shield back, and it'll hit everyone who you just attacked the first time with the shield. And I think that's great to have that on timing rather than just a normal ability, because that adds a little element of actual skill of learning to play these characters. As much as I'm not going to be the best ever player of Marvel's Avengers, I do want to be able to feel like I've actually learned more than someone who's only just picked up the game and is just button mashing. I want to be able to be a bit more effective in combat than someone who has no experience, and that's really great. Something like timing here for his kickback really helps separate people who have learnt how to play the game really well. And now we move on to Natasha Romanoff, or Black Widow, who was actually the team's starting hero because of her unique difficulties. Vince said that she had the most sense to start with because she provides so many challenges, especially her being just a regular, very talented human going up against some crazy god-powered god tier heroes, and absolutely makes sense to start with Black Widow here because she is just a human with basic attacks and then new abilities to add in. And if they had started the entire development with Hulk and Thor with their crazy abilities and crazy strength, it might have been more difficult for them to then go back and develop Black Widow after creating all of these insane moves for everyone else, to go back to Black Widow being able to electric shock people as her finish move, but she has been made to feel separate from everybody by making her incredibly fast and incredibly agile. She has the fastest melee attacks and combos in the game, and she's also able to alternate between her electric staffs as her heavy attacks, but you could also use them as her melee attacks with the light button, and switch between multiple ranged weapons, which we saw in her boss fight versus Taskmaster, which were her dual wielding pistols that she used to attack from range. And it makes sense for her, as well as with Captain America, for the two who aren't able to fly or jump crazy distances like Hulk can. It makes sense for them to be much faster around on the ground and more agile, especially with Black Widow, who will have less power behind her attacks unless she uses something like her electric staff. It's great to see that she hasn't just been completely neglected, so that when you pick your team of 4, you don't pick Black Widow ever. It's nice that they've made her an actual viable choice here, because they've had to. You can't just have the only female playable character at launch, although Captain Marvel is almost definitely coming. You can't have your only female character be clearly the weakest in the game and nobody wanting to play as her. On the pistol side, you can choose from automatic pistols, so simply holding down the trigger, dual wielding rapid pistols, which would seem to be they fire as fast as you can pull the trigger, and a heavy caliber magnum pistol, which must have a much slower fire rate but a much higher damage output. But a huge ability for Black Widow is her stealth, and the fact that she can turn completely invisible to the enemy. Of course, we can still see a faded outline of Natasha, otherwise it would make it so much harder for us to play as her as well. But the fact that she can literally hop in and out of combat in a second by just disappearing from the battlefield is absolutely huge. Especially if, I'm not sure how reviving works, if any of the heroes were to go down, but if you have Black Widow on your team and you're the last person surviving, then you could just turn invisible and go round and pick all of your friends up, and the enemies would have absolutely no idea. So this is an unbelievably powerful ability to be given to anyone, and the fact that it goes to Black Widow makes her a much more integral hero that you will need in your squad, and they've done really well here by making you want to play as Black Widow. It's not the stealth that you would see in a Batman game where you hide behind waist high cover, but any sort of stealth in here just to get your jump on the first few enemies in a war zone would be really helpful for the team to whittle down the numbers before it becomes just open war. She also has a grapple ability where, if you imagine like Just Cause, you can grapple onto anywhere and it will pull you towards that point, and that will make traversal so much easier. Again, if you compare her to Iron Man and Thor, who can fly, or Hulk, who can leap and grab onto the side of buildings, and Captain America can actually do parkour and fling himself up walls. So that would have just left Black Widow on her own, just jogging down the street with no way to keep up with her teammates, but with her grapple hook, she could basically fly herself to a certain degree. And the more I'm hearing about Black Widow, the more I actually really want to play as her. So they've absolutely achieved what they were going for here with Black Widow, because she's definitely not a hero to be looked over. Now, moving on to Hulk, Vince Napoli himself actually went back to the PS2 Hulk in Ultimate Destruction to get a feel for how Hulk should play, and then they've translated that across into Marvel's Avengers, which is absolutely a great idea. But they've also tried to make Hulk, rather than just purely a battering ram, to give him a bit of strategy to play. So as I said before, with Captain America and timing his attacks, this could take you from just a random player who's picked up Hulk for the first time, who can still have fun just clobbering enemies left and right, but if you're a really good Hulk player, then you could use strategy to make Hulk even more lethal in your hands. The example used here is by using a giant boulder which you can just grab out of the ground, and before the enemies even spot you, you could go up to the highest point you can find and dive bomb into the fight with your giant boulder to obliterate enemies and get a real head start on the battle. And they gave an example of using status effects, so you could make that boulder infused with cosmic energy and radiate it with gamma, so presumably it would do even more damage on impact. They also mentioned Hulk grabbing enemies, which we saw in the extended gameplay for A-Day, and it turns out that depending on which type of enemy, how large the enemy you picked up, Hulk's swing will change. So if it's a larger enemy, maybe he'll do more damage, but it'll be a slower swing. And that's really nice that they've taken this attention to detail, depending on which type of enemy's in Hulk's hands. And we move on to our penultimate hero, who is Iron Man. And Crystal Dynamics seem to have felt the most pressure when it came to Iron Man, because of course he kicked off the entire MCU. If you said that you'd heard of Iron Man and you hadn't read the comics, but you still were a big fan of him before Robert Downey Jr. took on the role, there's a lot of people who just didn't know about him. Me being one of them, I've never been a guy who goes out and reads comics every day, but that first film was unbelievable, and Vince Napoli said that he's leaning into the iconography rather than limiting the scope of his moveset, so that you can basically recreate everything that he's done in the iconic movies and also in comic panels. So rather than just giving him repulsor beams and making that the one attack that he has, you can instead integrate all of his weapons into his combo system depending on which abilities you choose. So there are loads of different repulsor attacks. Obviously you'll have his chest beam as an ultimate, and then you can fire from his palms. They've also given him 24 different laser attacks to use in combat, and for his heavy combo finisher you can actually choose a pinning missile which pins the enemy and takes them off and propels them around in the air in just random directions. And if you've played Battlefront 2, imagine when you kill someone with a jetpack and they just go flying, whizzing across the screen. It also happens in the speeder chase on Persana in The Rise of Skywalker, where a First Order jet trooper just goes absolutely careering out of the way once he's taken out of the action. And to be able to do that as well with Iron Man will look so amazing. Napoli estimated that there are about 36 different attacks which incorporate ranged moves, which can be then brought into combos that focus on his standard hand-to-hand combat abilities. And when I said penultimate for Iron Man, it turns out I was lying, because this is the penultimate character, and it is Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, and she of course has only melee attacks, which Vince Napoli described as a blessing and a curse, because you can do absolutely anything with her being able to stretch into any form. They have so much creative control over how they make Kamala play, and with her being a big fan of the Avengers, she actually takes influence from them. With her moves, she's got a version of Black Widow's light trip kick where she sweeps the leg of the enemies. She's also got a version of Hulk's shoulder ram attack. Apparently she's got a version of almost every character's attack with the Kamala spin on it, just to give us the feeling of her learning, and her learning from the Avengers themselves. And if you're worried that this means that her moveset won't feel original at all, I really doubt that'll be the case, because if you look at Hulk's shoulder smash, it's going to be massive and feel like huge impact, and then you look at Kamala trying to do it and it will feel like a completely different move because of her size and her animations. Finally, we get onto the God of Thunder, Thor, and as I said before, Vince Napoli worked on the PlayStation 4 God of War game, which itself looked to take combat inspiration from the idea of Thor, with the Leviathan axe being able to be recalled back to Kratos' hand whenever he wanted. And Vince Napoli noted that Thor Ragnarok led a large influence into his playstyle, because of course in the film Odin tells Thor that he's not the god of hammers, he's obviously the god of thunder, and then there's the amazing Rainbow Bridge scene of Thor without his hammer just shredding through enemies. So you don't need to have Thor's hammer on him in Marvel's Avengers to be able to do massive damage and take out loads of enemies. And that ability here is called the Odin Force, where Thor will electrify himself, protect himself and counter enemies, but it also has a unique property that adds to every single one of his attacks. It wasn't just as simple as it adds an extra bit of lightning damage, it completely changes the impact or the effect that it has on the enemies. And that just sounds amazingly badass, and I absolutely can't wait to play with Thor now. And in the gameplay trailer that we got at the last war table, we actually saw Thor use the Odin Force, and then Iron Man flew through the lightning, and rather than damaging him, it instead, like in the MCU, charged up Iron Man's suit, so I would assume he then does a little bit of extra damage for a certain amount of time. And when it comes to his hammer, you can change it into a different kind of weapon. You could either use it into a lobbed grenade sort of toss, where when it lands it creates a lightning explosion and is basically an AoE attack, where originally you would just throw it and it would pin an enemy against anything. Or you could even change it into the ability to seek out targets in the battlefield, which, if you imagine Captain America, where you target different enemies and then the shield bounces off all of them, it seems that you could do that as well with Thor's hammer. And that is the end of this article, and all I can say is that it's made me excited to play as every single hero on the roster. I wasn't so excited for Black Widow, but then hearing about her stealth and the grapple hook actually makes her worth checking out, and with Kamala Khan's moveset it'll be interesting to spot where she's taken inspiration from the other Avengers. And then when it comes to Thor, they've got inspiration from God of War. Iron Man and Captain America were always going to be amazing to play as is Hulk, where I cannot wait just to destroy everything in my path, and just have lots of fun when Marvel's Avengers comes out, which is September 4th. It's getting closer now, it's 2 months away. It might even be to the day when I put this video up that it comes out in 2 months. And should any more big news comes out before the next war table, of course I'll report on it. So subscribe and you'll know when those videos come out. Thank you for watching this video, leave a like if you enjoyed, and hopefully I will see you next time.